On Twitter, I often get into discussions about whether or not armed security is adequate or whether or not we also should be arming our teachers and our staff members at schools. And I take the firm position that indeed, the best case scenario is you have both armed security as well as armed teachers and staff members, but under no circumstances, in my view, are armed security members a substitute for allowing teachers and administrators to be able to carry guns themselves to protect our students and themselves. Stay tuned. Let's talk about it. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of the new best-selling book, Disarmed: What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. A lot of critical lessons there for Americans about the importance of our Second Amendment, except we learn about it through the actions and mistakes of the Ukrainian people leading up to the Russian invasion and beyond. All right, folks. So this video, I just want to talk about what I see are the reasons why armed teachers and armed administrators are preferable to armed security. Of course, the optimal thing in my view is that you have armed security and hardened schools when it comes to protecting our schools and our children. But you also want to make sure that teachers who volunteer and are trained, of course, teachers and administrators with proper training and who want to do this, are able to conceal carry in their classrooms as well, for many reasons. To begin with, we all obviously understand that the one thing that doesn't work when it comes to protecting our schools is gun-free zone signs. Because, if you think about it, if gun-free zone signs worked, then the Biden administration would be sending to the Ukrainian people no gun-free zone signs to put on the borders of Russia with the Ukraine. Or maybe they throw in a few pallets of no missiles allowed signs. But that's not what happens, because at the end of the day, we understand that gun-free zone signs are no substitute for actual firearms and weapons that defend innocent life against those who will do us harm, who are evil or psychopathic, and so on. But let's go through the reasons why I think, and tell me if you disagree in the comments below, or maybe there's something I missed here. But let me tell you why I think it's very important to understand that teachers and administrators being armed, if they're so willing to do so and are trained, are the better approach than just having security guards. To begin with, of course, as a practical matter, schools are larger and security guards cannot be everywhere all at once. This is obvious. Sometimes they have to go to the bathroom. Sometimes they may have to go out for lunch or to get trained, or they may get sick for the day and they can't make it in, whatever the reason is. Or maybe they're in, again, if a shooter comes in one part of the building, maybe they're in a different part of the building. So the first thing is, even if you have armed security, like, by the way, there was an armed security guard at Parkland School in Florida back in 2018, and nevertheless, the fact that you had a single armed security guard was not adequate for many reasons, not least of which is he had to be in the right place where the bad guy was in order to stop the bad guy. And if you're in a different part of the school, even if you run to the sounds of gunfire, which many of them don't do, we'll get to that in a second, even if you were to do that, guess what? You're still not going to get there faster than, let's say, the teacher or the administrator in the room with the shooter in the first instance. Because as you know, you are your own first responder. That is also the true in the context of school shootings, because keep in mind, for example, in Sandy Hook, I believe the police were literally on site in a matter of a minute or two. That's how fast they were. Nevertheless, the shooter in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, in Newtown, Connecticut, was able to kill far too many people, even though the police rushed in with super speed. Because at the end of the day, it has nothing about being anti-police or anything like that. The reality on the ground is when seconds count, police are minutes away. It's just the nature of policing. And that applies to school buildings and school campuses, no different than any other part of American life. And also keep in mind, in Columbine, back in 2012, they also had a single armed security guard at that school, but of course, that was simply not enough, because one guard in the wrong place in the facility relative to the shooter is just not adequate for stopping the threat fast enough and saving lives. That's the first point. Again, security guards can't be everywhere at all times at a school or campus. Number two is, you also don't know what kind of security guard you might get. Now, some may be heroic, like the people down in Nashville. Those police officers stepped in and did their job, but not all police officers are heroic. many police officers take the old model that says to serve and to protect. And they, for their own personal lives, and I'm not beating them up per se, because I understand where they're coming from, especially in today's world, which is so kind of anti-police, and everything you do, you run the risk of getting sued or put in jail for life. So I understand why police officers today might be a little skitterish about doing some aspects of their job. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but that is the reality we now live in. So I do think some police officers, for various reasons, view the model of to serve and protect as really to serve and collect, meaning to get their pension, to get their earning, to earn their living and move forward. They don't want to die for a job that pays $30 an hour. And yes, I understand you can push back and say, well, they swore an oath and they promised to do so. That's all true, but the reality is they're people too, and they've got families, and there's no guarantee that in that critical moment of crisis, a police officer is going to do his or her job in the right way. They may even if they try to do their job, they may not do a good job, and perhaps they wait for backup, or they make a mistake. They decide to set up a perimeter instead of attacking the shooter. We don't know, but the point is there is no guarantee that you're going to get a Bruce Willis Die Hard style heroic cop that's going to step in and try to save lives. You may get somebody that's not that heroic, and of course it's your life on the line, which goes back to, at the end of the day, no one has more skin in the game in a school shooting situation than, of course, the administrators and the teachers who are there in the metaphorical line of fire. They have every incentive to fight back. They're there, right there in the first instance if someone attacks them. They don't have to wait either for a security guard down the hall or for the police to show up or whatnot because they're driving from a mile across town. And the third thing is security guards often stand out, which makes them obvious and easy first targets. If you look at the Tops shooting, this was not a school shooting, but if you look at the Tops shooting in the Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York, the first person shot as the shooter went into that store was the security guard that everyone knew and everyone loved. He was very well known and understood, and that's all wonderful. But the fact is that the security guard, who tried to stop the shooter, by the way, so he was courageous, and I applaud him and I mourn his death. So the shooter knew that if he took out that first security guard at the Top supermarket in Buffalo, New York, if he killed him first or knocked him out, guess what? Everyone else in that store would be vulnerable and defenseless because, of course, they're in New York State, and even now it's still hard to carry a gun, although we are optimistic that's going to get better and easier as the court cases proceeded. But for the moment, of course, New York remains a very difficult place to defend yourself. And again, the Top shooter knew exactly to go after the security guard first, and then went on to kill, unfortunately, the other victims in that supermarket. And the fourth point, of course, as to why I think teachers and staff are better than security guards, because again, I go back to my point that they all have skin in the game. I mean, their lives are on the line, so they have every incentive to protect themselves and their students, of course. Think about this just from a common sense point of view. How many of you have flown on a commercial airline? Probably we all have. And what is the one thing all those commercial airlines and airplanes have in common? That is that there is no ejection seat for the pilots. Now, we understand that there are ejection seats, and ejection seat technology has been around, but they don't put it in 747s when they're flying for commercial airliners. And why is that? Because we don't want the pilots ejecting and leaving everyone behind. We want to make sure that the pilots and the co-pilots and the navigators trying to fly that plane, that they have the same incentive to stay alive and to land that plane safely as we as passengers do. And that's why we don't let pilots and co-pilots have ejection seat technology in the cockpits of commercial airliners. So to me, again, it's the same idea that you want to make sure the teachers and staff already have skin in the game because they're going to be the targets. So you want to make sure that they are protected as well. And I would also add, just from a moral point of view, keep in mind that teachers and staff members are American citizens as well. They have a right to self-defense. So why are you denying teachers and staff members the right to defend not just the lives of their children, which of course is a priority, but what about their own lives? What about the lives of the teachers and the staff members who potentially, many of whom are concealed carry holders outside of the school, and yet when they come to school, now you're making them defenseless. And how is that moral? It's totally immoral that you take people who would otherwise be able to defend themselves, they cross that border into their job, and next thing you know, they become defenseless targets. It is just immoral because they are entitled to protect their own lives, just like they have a duty to protect the lives of their pupils. And the last point I want to make, and this is very important, I actually thought that someone maybe should even, publish this as a book. Have you ever gone, by the way, to a bookstore and you see like the Mueller report has been published by like 3 different people, or the 9/11 report, or the January 6th report, or the Star report? All these government reports get, published as books with editorial comments. I always thought that someone should take the Parkland Report from Florida and publish that as a standalone book called the Parkland Report, and add commentary and editorial comments and whatnot to it, but should publish it so people can actually buy the Parkland Report. I always thought that should be done. It's something like 440 pages or something like that. And the Parkland Report, just for those of you not familiar with it, after the February 2018 shooting in Parkland down there in Florida, Governor Rick Scott at the time appointed a 15-person commission, including sheriffs, mental health professionals, school board members, and so on, to study what happened at Parkland, to come up with recommendations about what schools should do going forward to protect the students and themselves against these kind of, mass shooter, active shooter attempts. And one of the critical things that the Parkland Report concluded, and I'll put some links to this down below so you can check it out for yourself, is they actually said we should expand the program for arming teachers and staff members. In other words, here you have a year-long report, a year-long study, culminating in a 440 some odd page report done by a bipartisan commission in Florida, right? And they concluded that you should arm teachers and staff members. And I think that deserves a lot more attention than it's ever gotten. Now, obviously, if it came out to the opposite conclusion, I'm sure anti-gun organizations would be published in the Parkland Report as their books, i.e. like the, again, a la like the Mueller report or some of these other reports. But, I think maybe we should consider publishing that Parkland Report as a book. But again, we can talk about that down the road. So anyway, those are my reasons why I think, although armed security and hardened schools are important, and I support that, we should never lose sight of the fact that armed teachers and army administrators, assuming they're trained and they're, they have all the basic training and the desires and whatnot, all that sort of basic stuff has been fulfilled. Assuming that's all the case, I think they should be able to carry guns and protect themselves and their colleagues and their students, no different than an armed citizen can protect their colleagues, their family, and their community, walking through a store or going to the gas station. How is a school any different? In fact, if anything, I would say we should take extra steps to protect these children, because it seems odd that we take certain steps to protect the political elites like the president, the vice president with firearms. We protect royal elites like the coronation of the King Charles, right, with firearms, even though there's no guns in England, but they have plenty of guns over there for the government, apparently. Then we protect Hollywood elites with armed bodyguards. We protect the religious elites like the Pope, who has walls and also guns, protecting the Vatican, even though he's pro-gun control. You get the point, that we protect all these other elites in our society. It seems to me that we should make sure that people work in schools as well as the students themselves have the same level of protection when it comes to what we would do to protect our elites, which is to have firearms there in the hands of good people to protect them against bad people. And again, if gun-free zone signs worked, we would have just sent pallets of them to the Ukraine to put up at the Russian border. We obviously did not do that because gun-free signs are no substitute for firearms. Okay, folks, hope you learned a little bit something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.